All right, everyone, it's time to talk about terrorism in Russia. Of course, in St. Petersburg, the metro attack there, I believe at last count, 11 have died and several dozen others are injured. Some people were saying, oh, why aren't you covering this? Why aren't you talking about it? They said this yesterday, like right after it happened, within the first hour. I had several people kind of almost seemingly pissed off at the fact that I wasn't talking about it. But the thing is, if the facts aren't in, if you still got too much speculation, it's like, was it a gas explosion? Was it a terrorist event? Was it some criminal syndicate, whacking somebody? And it wasn't entirely clear. Now we know, of course, it seems that the body parts, apparently, of one of the people that actually died appear to show evidence that it was a suicide bombing. That is, one of the people dead was actually also the one responsible. And they found a second explosive, actually, I believe about a half a mile away to the northeast. I can't remember the name of the square that it was planted at. They defused that one. So there could have been even more carnage. If you've got a suicide bombing on a train, apparently to kill a random crowd of people with shrapnel, and you've got a second explosive, all signs point towards terrorism. Now, who would be the group responsible? With Russia, it can be a little bit more difficult. It's like within Turkey. You get an attack in Turkey. It can perhaps be difficult to determine, is this ISIS or some other strictly zealot-related group, or is it Kurdish separatists? With Russia, you have much the same thing. Was this an attack by Chechen separatists, or the militias there operating in what they want to be an autonomous region called Chechnya, who just happen to be Islamic, but ultimately it's sort of a semi-religious nationalism of sorts? Was it that, or was it ISIS or something in retaliation maybe for Russia's strikes in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere? It might be difficult to determine that. I'm sure that at some point they'll probably try to ID who specifically was responsible. When they get the identities of the dead, of course, it's going to be kind of hard if the person wearing this explosive or whatever was essentially vaporized by their own explosion. If they manage to ID them, they'll probably be able to put two and two together and figure out, oh yeah, this person, native Chechnyan, and was under surveillance for 2 years for talking to Al-Qaeda members or something like that. Yeah, that'd be a pretty good indicator that you probably know who done it and why. These kinds of random attacks tend to be fairly common with religious zealots, not just within Islam, although that sort of takes the show lately. For the last few decades, if there's a zealot-related religious attack, it's fairly easy to determine what group is most likely responsible for that. The natural inclination, I'm sure, immediately among the MSNBCs of the Western world, was to look at what happened in St. Petersburg and say, oh, please, let this be like some skinhead who just wanted to kill off a bunch of minorities in this large metropolitan area. Saw that there were, people who didn't look Russian or Eastern European on the bus. So they said, aha, well, it's time to strike. And they were actually like a total racist skinhead. That's fairly uncommon, though, because the specter, sort of the boogeyman of the far-right evil skinhead terrorist, it is present. There are people that are unfortunately like that in the world, but they're fairly uncommon. And yet that's mostly what the corporate media tells us we should be worried about. Meanwhile, there are people who are zealots. Whether they're homegrown or not, it doesn't even have to do with race. We've had this problem in Europe. I think the last, which attack was it? The one in France there, the last large one, other than the truck attack. That was an individual who was already European. It was someone who was radicalized by foreign elements, but who was themselves actually European. We've had this in Russia too, with the Boston Marathon bombings. You have the Tsarnaevs. They're not from the middle of Afghanistan or something like that. They've gone over and become radicalized. That happens, or they become radicalized by reading some Al Qaeda magazine online, some publication. And here, of course, because we have the First Amendment, there's no specific way to block that material, no matter how objectionable it may be. Now, I say, that ultimately these people that are worried about, oh, well, people are going to get radicalized online. They do this for Islam at the same time that they do it for, like, the alt-right or the far-right or the new right or any other right-wing ideology, libertarians, ANCAPs, whatever. They say we need to suppress this because people become radicalized. I've always been of the belief, regardless of my political affiliation at the time, that if all religions and political institutions and philosophies are simply intercompeting on an even keel, good ideas tend to rise to the top, bad ideas tend to be suppressed, maybe not short term, but over the longer span of time, unperturbed, without outside propaganda by states or funded orders by organizations. My belief is that good ideas tend to prevail, at least for the most part, and thus the danger is lower. Then, of course, you get things like this, and one of the first reactions of corporate media or even states, again, whether it's Russia, the US, whatever it happens to be, we need more censorship, we need more of a police state apparatus, we need to conduct more surveillance, we need to do the same things that already are not working. We need to double down on things that don't actually keep anybody safer, because that's really the goal. The goal is to push sort of an authoritarian agenda on the backs of human misery. They do this with poverty all the time. Oh, we need more money to fund the war on poverty that's making poverty worse. We need more funding for the drug war, the drug war that makes addiction more prevalent. We need more money to enforce prohibition that's causing an entire generation of drunkards to rise up. It doesn't work. When governments and so forth suppress something, it usually becomes more prevalent. That's going to be the case also with Islamofascism. When these people at the state level, when they act as though some foreign group is singularly responsible for this, and their answer is suppression across the board that also by proxy ends up targeting other political affiliations as far right or too religious or something, instead of fixating on the one group that actually 9 times out of 10 has involvement, it doesn't work very well. In fact, it causes all these shit posters to arise online who are saying, oh, Islam is red-pilled because, subjugate, like submissive women or something like that. It's just a pile of crap. So I feel sorry for the people that got killed in St. Petersburg. I'm sure there are elements of our media will come out and say, oh, well, yeah, but the Russians are evil because Putin-Trump conspiracy. Evil Russians, they're still communists. The Soviet Union never fell. It's like the 1970s. And they'll sit back there, then they're secretly like chuckling about the fact that civilians died in Russia. So shame on them, I suppose, for doing so. A lot of them won't touch the issue because it involves probably, not certainly, but it's looking pretty likely here, religious zealotry that they just don't want to talk about because it's inconvenient for their... I mean, if this can happen in Russia, not exactly the most multicultural, diverse society on the face of the earth, including in their metro areas, but this is Russia. We're not talking about like London or Paris or something. How much easier is it to happen in Western countries that have much less border control, don't really have a tolerance at all for even the lighter aspects of nationalism and want to erase their own national identity? Therein really lies the problem. And that's a problem for Western Europe and parts of the United States primarily, not just with, terrorism, but also, criminal activity of other sorts. As far as Russia, though, Putin responds appropriately. He'll probably get called like a tyrant for doing so. By the way, I do realize that Putin, among the youth there, has slightly fallen out of favor. There are a lot of protests there, and I'm no friend or fan of Putin. He assassinates people. He's an authoritarian. He's also in bed with these various quasi-religious oligarchs in his country. Wonder what group they're from. But at the same time, his strategy for dealing with this specific kind of issue is more sane than what Western Europe has done over the last few decades. It is. It's basically beyond argument at this point. We can look at what happens. The number of attacks over there with Russia, the big Russian bear that still is bombing these people, and yet the attacks seem not that prevalent. Meanwhile, you've got countries, they're not even involved in the Middle East at all, and they get attacked constantly. It's two different worlds. People need to wake up and realize, I think, the difference between the two policies that are put forth by these states, and really see what the fruits of those policies truly are. That's about all. Peace out.